would you wipe out your family to be with me?
Did you ever say anything to him about
Never.
anything about his kids being a problem? Anything about his wife being a problem?
Never. This shocked me just as much as I think it shocked the rest of the world.
8 years, thousands of theories, millions of views, and one mystery that refuses to stay buried. Because what if everything people thought they knew about the Blackwood case was only part of the news? What if the confession that supposedly closed the case actually opened an entirely new set of questions? Think about it. A family disappears. A nation watches in horror. A husband confesses. The headlines move on. Case closed, right? Not exactly. Because while Chris Watts became the face of one of the most shocking criminal cases in recent memory, another name continued to surface in online discussions, private forums, and endless late-night debates. Nicole Kessinger, a woman who was never charged, never prosecuted, and officially walked away. Yet somehow, years later, people are still asking the same question. Why? Why do certain timelines seem impossible to explain? Why do some details continue to spark controversy? And why are internet investigators still dissecting every document, every interview, and every unanswered question all these years later? Coincidence? Misunderstanding? Or something much stranger? Tonight, we're stepping into a news filled with contradictions, mysteries, missing pieces, and questions that refuse to disappear. Because the deeper you dig into the Watts case, the darker the shadows become. For years, people believed the Watts case was finished. The confession was signed, the headlines faded, the courtroom doors closed, and the world moved on. But some stories refused to stay buried, because every time someone thought the mystery was finally over, another detail surfaced, another timeline appeared, another question emerged, and suddenly, people found themselves right back where they started, looking at the same case, asking the same question. What really happened behind the scenes? Officially, the news seemed simple. Chris Watts confessed. The investigation ended. The public accepted the conclusion. But simplicity has a strange habit of falling apart when people begin examining the details. And that's exactly what happened. Because while Chris Watts became the center of the scandal, another figure quietly remained in the background. Nicole Kessinger, the woman whose name refused to disappear. At first, nobody paid much attention. Why would they? The case already had its villain. The public already had its answers. But then internet researchers started comparing timelines, reviewing statements, cross-checking interviews, and what they found didn't necessarily provide answers. It created more questions. A lot more. Questions that nobody seemed eager to discuss. Questions that continued growing louder year after year. The first cracks appeared when people began looking at Nicole Kessinger's public statements. According to her version of events, she believed Chris Watts' marriage was practically over. She believed the relationship had already collapsed. She believed she was stepping into a situation that was already ending. At least, that was the news. But critics quickly pointed to something strange. Because when people are confident about a situation, they usually don't spend countless hours questioning it. And according to records discussed throughout the years, Nicole Kessinger appeared deeply invested in understanding exactly where she stood. Far more invested than someone who supposedly believed everything was straightforward. That alone sparked controversy. But then came something even stranger. Online communities began reconstructing the complete timeline of the final weeks before the tragedy. Every trip, every call, every message, every conversation. And the deeper they looked, the more complicated things became. Suddenly, people weren't discussing what happened. They were discussing what might have been missed. Social media exploded. Forums filled with theories. True crime channels uploaded video after video. Millions of views followed. Some people believed the mystery was solved. Others believed the real news had barely been touched. And somewhere in the middle sat a growing mountain of unanswered questions. Then came the searches that would fuel debate for years. Because once people learned about them, they couldn't stop talking about them. Why were certain phrases searched? Why did certain topics appear repeatedly? And why did those searches seem to contradict parts of the public narrative? Nobody could agree. One side insisted there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. The other side believed the explanations never fully added up. The arguments became endless. Every new documentary added fuel to the fire. Every discussion created even more controversy. Every timeline breakdown generated thousands of comments, and every comment section became a battlefield. Then something unexpected happened. People started looking beyond what was said. Instead, they focused on what wasn't said. And that's where things became truly fascinating. Because in major investigations, the biggest clues aren't always the statements people make. Sometimes they're the details people avoid discussing altogether, the moments that receive quick answers, the questions that never receive follow-ups, the conversations that seem to end just as they become interesting. Critics argue that several key moments in the Watts timeline fit that description perfectly, not because they proved anything, but because they raised eyebrows. Lots of them. One researcher famously described the case as a puzzle with several pieces that appeared to belong somewhere else. The quote spread across social media almost instantly because it captured exactly how many people felt. Every answer seemed to generate two new questions. Every explanation appeared to create another contradiction. And every contradiction attracted another wave of attention. The news simply refused to die. Meanwhile, Chris Watts sat behind bars. Years passed. The public obsession should have faded, but somehow it didn't. Instead, interest continued growing. New viewers discovered the case. Old viewers returned. And creators began uncovering details that many people had overlooked. Some of those details were small. Others were impossible to ignore. One timeline researcher spent months mapping every significant event from the final weeks leading up to the tragedy. When the project was finished, the results shocked thousands of viewers, because events that once seemed random suddenly appeared connected, not necessarily suspicious, not necessarily criminal, but connected, enough to make people stop and think, enough to make people ask whether the official narrative captured the entire picture or only part of it. And that question became the foundation of everything that followed, because once people begin believing there may be missing pieces, they start searching for them everywhere. Every interview becomes important. Every statement becomes evidence. Every inconsistency becomes a potential clue. And every unanswered question becomes a mystery. That's exactly what happened with Nicole Kessinger. Year after year, her name continued resurfacing. Not because new charges appeared. Not because new arrests happened. Not because officials suddenly reopened the case. But because public curiosity never disappeared. The debate became larger than any single document, larger than any single interview, larger than any single theory. It became a cultural obsession, a true crime mystery that refused to fade into history. And just when people thought they'd uncovered every possible detail, a new series of discussions began focusing on one specific day, one specific timeline, and one sequence of events that many researchers still describe as the most controversial chapter of the entire Watts case. Because according to those who spent years studying the records, everything seemed to change during those final hours. The calls, the movements, the decisions, the timing. Every road appeared to lead back to the same place. And what happened next would transform a closed case into a mystery that millions of people are still debating today. The deeper researchers dug into the Watts case, the stranger the timeline became. Not because new evidence suddenly appeared, not because officials reopened the investigation, but because people started noticing patterns that had somehow escaped attention for years. And once those patterns were noticed, they became impossible to ignore. Everything seemed to point back to one critical period, the final days before the tragedy. The period when Chris Watts' life appeared to be moving in two completely different directions at the same time. On one side was his family. On the other was the future he seemed desperate to build. And somewhere between those two worlds stood Nicole Kessinger, the woman whose name was becoming almost as controversial as Chris Watts himself. As online investigators reconstructed events, a new narrative began spreading across social media. What if certain warning signs existed long before anyone realized? What if pieces of the puzzle had been sitting in plain sight the entire time? The theories exploded. Videos gained millions of views. Discussion forums turned into digital war zones. Everyone had an opinion. Nobody had definitive answers. Then came one of the most debated subjects of all, the phone activity. For years, critics argued that certain digital records created more questions than explanations, not because they proved wrongdoing, but because they painted a picture that many viewers found difficult to ignore. Why were certain conversations remembered in detail, while others seemed forgotten? Why did some timelines appear incredibly precise, while others became blurry? And why did every attempt to explain those inconsistencies create even more controversy? Nobody could agree. One side claimed people were reading far too much into ordinary events. The other side believed the inconsistencies were impossible to dismiss. The arguments grew louder, and then the anonymous sources arrived. Now, let's be clear. Anonymous sources are the internet's favorite form of entertainment. Sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're completely ridiculous, and sometimes they sound like a Hollywood screenwriter drank 3 energy drinks and watched conspiracy documentaries all night. But regardless of credibility, the rumors spread. One anonymous source claimed individuals connected to the case had privately expressed concerns about unexplored leads. Another claimed certain conversations happened behind closed doors that never appeared in public reports. A third insisted there were details known by insiders that would supposedly change everything. Did any of it have proof? Not really. Did it stop people from talking? Absolutely not. The speculation became unstoppable, and every new theory pushed the mystery even further into the spotlight. Meanwhile, Chris Watt's confession continued casting a shadow over everything, because critics kept asking the same question. If the entire news was already known, why were people still discovering new questions years later? That's when attention shifted towards something even more controversial, the timeline itself. Because timelines don't care about opinions. Timelines don't care about emotions. Timelines only care about sequence. And according to many researchers, the sequence was where things became incredibly uncomfortable. Events that seemed unrelated suddenly appeared connected. Conversations that once looked ordinary suddenly looked important. Small decisions began attracting massive scrutiny. And every hour of the final days became the subject of endless analysis. The internet was obsessed. One creator described it perfectly. The case didn't end. The discussion simply changed forms. And honestly, that statement wasn't entirely wrong. Because while the legal chapter was finished, the public investigation never really stopped. Thousands of people continued examining every available detail, searching for explanations, searching for clarity, searching for something that would finally make everything make sense. Instead, many felt they discovered the opposite: more confusion, more contradictions, more mysteries. Then another controversy emerged: public perception. Because in the core of public opinion, facts and emotions often collide. Some viewers became convinced Nicole Kessinger knew far more than she admitted. Others argued she was being unfairly scrutinized simply because she happened to be connected to a notorious case. The debate divided audiences completely. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Friendships ended over arguments. Entire online communities split into opposing camps. One side demanded answers. The other demanded evidence. And neither side was willing to back down. The result? The Watts case transformed into something much bigger than a criminal investigation. IT became a cultural phenomenon, a mystery people couldn't stop discussing, a news that generated endless documentaries, podcasts, breakdowns, and theories. Even years later, even after countless discussions, even after millions of words had already been spoken, the fascination remained. And then came perhaps the most shocking realization of all. Nobody was arguing about what happened anymore. They were arguing about what might have happened. That distinction changed everything. Because possibilities are powerful. Possibilities create curiosity. Curiosity creates theories. And theories create endless engagement. Exactly what happened here. The mystery became self-sustaining. Every unanswered question generated another. Every theory inspired 3 more. Every discussion attracted new viewers. And before long, an entire generation of true crime followers found themselves pulled into a news that seemed incapable of reaching a final conclusion. But what nobody realized at the time was that the biggest wave of controversy was still ahead. Because hidden among years of debates, rumors, and speculation was a question that refused to disappear. A question involving timing. A question involving decisions. And a question involving a series of events that many people still describe as the most controversial sequence in the entire Watts timeline. A sequence that, according to some researchers, changed the way they viewed the case forever. Because once they examined that chain of events closely, nothing looked quite the same anymore. And what they discovered next would push the controversy to a level nobody expected. Years later, thousands of theories, millions of opinions, and a mystery that refuses to disappear. Because after everything people have analyzed, every timeline, every interview, every statement, every debate, one question still hangs over the Watts case like a shadow that refuses to leave. Was the entire news ever fully understood? Or are there still pieces missing from the picture? Think about it. A case that supposedly ended years ago is still generating arguments today. That doesn't happen by accident. Most stories fade. Most headlines disappear. Most controversies eventually lose momentum. This one didn't. In fact, the opposite happened. The more time passed, the more people became interested. And the reason is simple. Questions. Lots of them. Questions nobody seems able to answer in a way that satisfies everyone. For some people, the case is completely closed. Chris was confessed. Justice was served. End of news. But for others, that's exactly where the mystery begins. Because confessions can close courtrooms. They don't always close public curiosity. And curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when timelines become controversial. Especially when discussions continue for years. Especially when people believe important details were never fully explained. That's what transformed the Watts case from a tragedy into a true crime obsession. A news that continues pulling people back. Again, and again, and again. Then came Dylan Tallman, the former inmate whose claims reignited debate across online communities. Some dismissed him immediately. Others believed his statements deserved attention. The internet did what it always does. It exploded. Suddenly, old discussions returned. Old theories resurfaced. Old questions found new audiences. And once again, the Watts case dominated conversations. Not because anyone discovered definitive answers, but because uncertainty creates fascination. People can accept answers. What they struggle to accept is ambiguity. And ambiguity is exactly what keeps this news alive. Even now, even after all these years, even after endless documentaries, the arguments continue. One side believes every major question already has an explanation. The other believes critical pieces remain unresolved. Neither side appears willing to change its mind. And that's why the mystery survives. Because every controversy eventually comes down to a single thing. What do you believe? Do you think the public has already seen the complete picture? Or do you think there are still chapters missing from the news? Because depending on who you ask, the answer changes completely. And maybe that's the most shocking part of all. Not the theories, not the speculation, not the endless debates, but the fact that so many people can examine the exact same timeline and reach entirely different conclusions. That's what makes this case unique. That's what keeps people watching. And that's what keeps the discussion alive year after year. The Watts case may be legally finished, but in the minds of millions of people, the investigation never truly ended. It simply moved somewhere else. Into documentaries, into forums, into podcasts, into comment sections, into endless late-night conversations between people searching for answers. And perhaps that's where this news will remain. Not as a solved mystery, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a question that continues dividing opinions long after the headlines disappeared. Because the deeper people look, the more complicated everything seems to become. And maybe the truth is simpler than anyone thinks. Or maybe it isn't. That's for you to decide. After everything you've heard tonight, after every timeline, every contradiction, every theory, and every unanswered question, where do you stand? Because one thing is certain. The debate surrounding the Watts case isn't ending anytime soon. And neither are the questions, and now, the question belongs to you. After everything you've seen tonight, after every timeline, every theory, every contradiction, and every unanswered question, what do you believe really happened? Because let's be honest, the deeper people dig into the Watts case, the stranger becomes. A confession, a controversy, a timeline filled with mysteries, and questions that continue haunting this news years later. Coincidence? Misunderstanding? Or something that was never fully understood? Millions of people have looked at the same information, yet somehow they continue reaching completely different conclusions. Some believe the case ended the moment Chris Watts confessed. Others believe the biggest questions were never answered. And that disagreement is exactly why this news refuses to disappear. But now it's your turn. If you were examining this case yourself, what detail would concern you the most? What moment stands out? What question do you think deserves an answer? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know exactly where you stand. And don't hold back, because some of the most interesting discussions happen right there in the comments section. Also tell us where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel and how many different perspectives people bring to the conversation. If you enjoyed this investigation and want more deep dives into controversial mysteries, shocking timelines, hidden details, and cases that continue dividing public opinion, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next investigation might be even more unbelievable than this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, keep questioning, keep investigating, and remember, sometimes the stories everyone thinks are finished are only just beginning.